Everyone, good morning. Okay, we are talking about shehiyah. Okay, so let's just do a quick review of what shehiyah is. Shehiyah is good morning. Shehiyah is that when Shabbos comes in, we're supposed to have we can't be doing any cooking on Shabbos. That we know. That is biblically prohibited to cook anything on Shabbos. Because of that, there are a number of restrictions in order to ensure that we don't mistakenly go ahead and cook. Okay, so one of those is that we don't want to leave food on an open fire. By open fire, I mean like an open stove, oven, etc. That's not fully cooked, because if we do so, there's a concern that I'm going to adjust the knobs, etc., and that's problematic. If I do so, then right. So therefore, if I have food that's not fully cooked, that I might go ahead and adjust the knobs and adjust the temperature, and therefore, in order to prevent that, Chazal or sages said you have to make sure that your food is at least cooked k'ma'achal ben drusai, which is basically halfway cooked. Once it's halfway cooked, then we don't have the same concern, because it's already almost there. You're not going to be, part of the concern is like the psychological elements, like this anxiety, like, oh my gosh, my food is not getting cooked enough. Crank it up, and you go ahead and really increase it. But if it's already halfway cooked, it's already edible, our sages were not as concerned. So again, it starts with biblical prohibition against cooking. Therefore, there's a concern about a person adjusting the flame, and therefore not to leave food which is uncooked. But if it's already partially cooked, or at least edible, i.e. machal ben drusai, we'll go with the more standard view, halfway cooked, which most understand to mean basically edible. At that point, there's less of a concern that a person is going to adjust the flame, adjust the temperature, and therefore it's permitted to leave that food on the fire. What we're now going to get into is two things. One is, so we also talked about, let's say you have, your cholent. So we spoke about putting a crock pot on the fire before Shabbos. Now, if you're putting your food on the crock pot before Shabbos, very often it's not going to be. Depends on what time you're putting it up, but it takes a long time for it to be cooked. So, am I allowed to put my crock pot on the fire before Shabbos? We spoke about right before Shabbos with raw meat. We said that it's a little tricky. So let's say I want to put my crock pot up an hour before Shabbos. What do? It's not halfway cooked. So what we said is that if it's covered, if the flame is covered, then it's permitted. So what does it mean the flame is covered? So we spoke about the conventional view is that the flame itself is covered, meaning the elements are covered. So let's say on a stovetop, that would mean putting a blech, therefore the element being covered. In a crock pot, that would mean putting like foil around, on top of the elements, which is the whole, the pieces, surrounding it. So you put foil around it. We spoke about also around it, meaning in it. So basically before you put the insert in, what's the outer part called? Is there a term? The outer part of the crock pot. Okay, you know what I mean. Sorry? No, not the ceramic. Meaning not the ceramic pot. Meaning the ceramic part is the insert, meaning the piece around the ceramic pot. Right, so whatever it's called, you know what I'm talking about. Basically, the outside thingy. Okay, we'll call it the technical term. Okay, so basically, you want to put foil in throughout there, right? The best thing you could do is, as we spoke about last week, go home and basically take some foil and cover the inside of your crock pot, not the pot, but the part that has the elements, cover those, and then it takes care of a lot of issues. It takes care of this. You can put your cholent up at any time before Shabbos, right? And we'll talk about it's going to have some other benefits, which we're going to talk about later. If you need to take the cholent off and then put it back on, it's going to have benefits for that as well. We spoke about different opinions about taping the knob as well. Do you have to do that? So we saw some opinions said all you have to do is tape the knob. Some opinions said you want to do both put the foil and tape the knob. Bottom line is, just to be clear, there certainly is a conventional view is just covering the elements. There are those who say, just do both, cover the elements and tape it down, which is usually not like a tremendous, or take the knob off. My wife just takes the knob, just like a piece of tape on it, so it's less, she takes the knob off, and that's the simplest thing to do. Okay, whatever. But basically, again, strictly speaking, all you have to do is cover the elements, right? And then you're good to go. Okay? Now, what we're going to talk about today is a couple of things, a couple of smaller things. Hopefully we'll see how far we get. One is, let's say you have in your oven, what do you do when let's say it's right before Shabbos and you didn't yet, you didn't get your chicken ready, okay? You didn't cook your chicken, right? So we spoke about till now. If you have an hour, let's say it takes 2 hours to cook chicken, right? So let's give a scenario. It's a Friday on a, short Shabbos, winter Shabbos. You came home from work and it's, 3:30 and there's like an hour till the candle lighting. And so it takes, let's say 2 hours to cook a chicken and you have an hour. We said, great, you can put it in the oven, no problem, right? Well, one thing we haven't discussed here, which we're going to discuss today, is taking it out of the oven. Why is that a question? Because there's a thermostat, right? You open the oven, it's going to trigger something or could trigger something. Are you allowed to even open your oven? Forget about, you could usually disable the lights and stuff like that. But what about opening the oven and triggering a thermostat? That's one of the things we have to talk about, okay? But we said, aside from that, putting it in with an hour left to Shabbos should be fine because it's 2 hours. Let's say you came home with 20 minutes left to Shabbos, excuse me. Are you allowed to put it in the oven based on what we discussed? No, right? But we said if you cover the oven, the elements, you could. Now, in an oven, can you cover the elements? Now, they have those boxes, right? Do they still sell those? People have these like boxes they put in the oven. That used to be a thing. I'm saying used to too. Okay, whatever. The post can speak about this. Apparently, I don't know, they used to sell these boxes where they put in the oven, which is a way of like covering the elements. But your typical oven, you have no way of covering the elements. But we did see that there are two opinions. One opinion says you have to cover the elements. The other opinion says you have to cover the knobs. So the poskim 2 points. Let's see the Orcha Shabbos over here, who says like this. If you look at the Orcha Shabbos, source 38 on page 144. Source 38 on page 144. Okay, this is the Orcha Shabbos again. This one he quotes the Sefer quite a lot. I forgot who the author is, but it's a pretty mainstream, conventional Sefer on the laws of Shabbos that is written in the past past 2 decades maybe. He says like this in the Orcha Shabbos, source 38 on page 144. The Eitzel Lazeh. And the suggestion, the advice, imlo hispik levashel me'od yom as a tafshil kishir. If you did not have enough time to cook something or to bake something before Shabbos, so our scenario, I came home and there's a half hour left to Shabbos, and I didn't cook anything, and I want to put the chicken in the oven, I want to put the chal in the oven, and I didn't have enough time to bake it yet. Okay, at all. It's not even going to be baked halfway through, and I can't put something to cover the elements because it's an oven. Lehadbik niyar devek ala kaftor. So I could go ahead and put some tape on the button, meaning the knob, shemagbirim bo esachom, where the knob which I use to adjust the temperature, ba'ofen shelo yuchal lisovev esakaftor bli lahasir siniyar. Put enough tape that I'm unable to adjust the knob without removing the paper. In other words, place like a real cover on it, something of substance on it. So not like a flimsy piece of tape or like 2-3 pieces of tape, whatever, and then blocking you from going ahead and adjusting the temperature. Because although we said, again, there were two opinions. One says cover the elements, one said cover the knob, and the conventional view is we cover the elements. But when we're stuck, like this case, you would be allowed to put that chicken in the oven, even with 10 minutes, 5 minutes, half hour left to Shabbos, as long as you do some level of covering the heating elements. In this case, what would you do is you would cover the knob.
Isn't that what Shabbos mode does? Can't change the temperature.
Shabbos mode does do that. Yes.
But you can change the temperature.
On Shabbos mode?
Yes, you can. You can't do
You have
it
to-
the same way.
You have to, you have to press many buttons.
Yeah, you have to
Okay.
press
You can't inadvertently.
But you could disable Shabbos mode.
Yeah, but that's already too many steps. So I'm for simplicity's sake, over the next year, and maybe we'll come back to Shabbos mode. There are also different versions and newer versions of Shabbos mode, which have been changing. But we're not going to discuss Shabbos mode today, but God willing, we'll come back and have a discussion about Shabbos mode and Shabbos modes, because again, there's been like developments in the Shabbos mode world where there are different versions, and it's complicated. But we should have a shiur on Shabbos mode because it's probably one of the greatest like misnomers and confusing like inventions ever. You can use Shabbos mode on Shabbos. Yes, it drives me ballistic. Oh, whatever. It's not. Yeah. Yes.
What about setting a timer on short Shabbos, where in Shabbos mode, so then it just turns off after?
Are you talking about for turning? Well, that wouldn't help you for that. You're saying to take food out of the oven?
Well, you put it in before Shabbos, you start cooking it, but then you set it on Shabbos mode, so it's still. And you put a timer on.
So again, we're gonna make Shabbos. So let's forget even Shabbos mode. Let's say I put a timer on. Let's say I have an oven that could somehow put a timer on to turn it off. That would not help the issue of adjusting the temperature. Meaning, if it's fully, we're talking about food which is not fully cooked. Again, I want to be clear. We're not talking about food which is fully cooked. We're talking about food which is not fully cooked until now. So again, let's go to the levels. Ideally, you put something on a heating element before Shabbos which is fully cooked. Okay? If you're not able to do so, it has to be halfway cooked. By halfway cooked, take the amount of time it takes to cook or bake this. Let's say 2 hours to bake chicken on chicken. So it has to be an hour of baking has been done before Shabbos begins. And then you don't have to do anything to the oven. If that's not possible, then, and again, what's the concern here? The concern is I'm going to adjust the temperature. So the case we're talking about is a case where I don't even have the hour. I have 15 minutes. I'm still allowed to do so as long as I cover the knobs. Putting a timer wouldn't help over there because the concern isn't that I'm going to turn it off We're not concerned to turn it off because, again, the concern is I'm anxious that that my food is not ready. So the concern is only am I going to adjust the flame. So putting a timer on wouldn't alleviate that concern. Turning the timer on would ensure that it turns off at the end of the process, but that's not the rabbi's concern. The rabbi's concern was I'm going to adjust the flame while it's still getting ready, and there, in that respect, the timer wouldn't help. Yes?
So my old ovens had a knob to adjust the temperature, but I mean, my oven's still not new, but it has
Buttons.
buttons.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Just
You cover the buttons, meaning in a way that, it covers the button with something substantial. Meaning if it's just a clear piece of masking tape, you just press the button. That's not really, it should be something that has like some blockage of some sort. I'm trying to think of like a good example. Yeah, a piece of cardboard would be great. I mean, again, this is like this should be an extreme example. Be a little bit more planful, okay? I'm not the most be a little bit more planful. This is like obviously an extreme example, but yeah, you'd want to get a piece of cardboard. Shabbos Chak. This is really, again, this is like you really didn't have anything prepared 15 minutes before Shabbos, you're throwing everything into the oven. Yeah, you want to use a piece of cardboard. That would be the ideal thing to do. Okay, now, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, certain foods, because for the oven, right, a lot of people I know put in, let's say, string beans, like barely cooked, because as it's warming up, it will get ruined before the Shabbos meal, right?
Right, okay.
So is that considered not, like,
So they're putting it in the, so
the oven, let's say at candle lighting, they put
Right.
it in barely cooked.
that's a problem. I don't, meaning,
Is it you could eat it raw.
okay, so, you're saying because
You
string
wouldn't
beans,
serve it, but you could, right?
I don't know. So again, I'm going to say principles, and you'll apply because I'm not, but basically, if it is considered like if you could theoretically pull it out of the oven, like a half, with the same amount of time afterwards. Let's say I put it in 10 minutes before, and I could take it out 10 minutes later. Then yeah, that's machal ben dushai.
Okay.
So if that is the reality, so I just want,
It really is.
fine.
Yeah.
Then that's okay. Then that's okay. Okay. So then the next part of this Aruch Shabbos is going to now take us to other place about opening the oven, which is a complicated discussion. I just want to, this keeps on coming up where, we learn these halachas. You're like, oh, this is so irrelevant. Sometimes, I always go back and forth. This book, many of you may find a little bit complicated, right? There are books that talk about the laws of Shabbos, which are like, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. But what this Sefer does is it brings us, like, kind of pulls the screen back and gives you a little bit of behind the scenes and gives you different opinions. Now, somebody's like, what's the value of having the different opinions? So I'll give you another example. This is related to something we learned maybe like 3 weeks ago, but it came up to Shul. For anyone who's here this Shabbos, do you have Chulent the Shabbos in Shul? Anybody? Okay, no, nobody? Neither did I. Okay, but whatever. But if you did, the Chulent was predicated on something that we learned 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And that is because somehow someone was putting up the chulent and they did not realize that I don't know how, don't ask me how, but they made the chulent in the outer element. They didn't put the... Yeah. Okay. It's a little gross. So don't, whatever. But they did. Okay. And then they only realized that on Shabbos. And they came to me and everyone's like, oh my gosh, we're never eating here again. Anyway, the point is that they made the chulent in the outer elements, not in the inserts. Okay. That's like very guyish, right? So whatever. It's busy Erev Shabbos. And the question was, what's the question? How do you get it out of that element, right? Meaning normally we take the insert out. Okay, then you could pour it out, you could scoop from there. But what we see earlier, you're not supposed to put a ladle into something's on the fire. This thing is the fire, right? So you could turn it over. The problem is over here, it's a small plug, a short plug, where it's kind of cramped in the corner. The only way to do that would be to pull the plug out. Also a no-no, right? So you're really stuck. So what do you do? So, okay, let's forget the Gentile for a second, but that would be a fair question. But if you recall, we did see, let's talk about why can't you put a ladle into a crock pot, into something on the fire? What was the rationale behind that? Yeah, it's like similar to stir. We said that because when stirring, according to, right, stirring is a way of increasing, of accelerating the heating process. That's why you don't stir. On Shabbos, you don't stir food on the fire, right? Because it's accelerating the heating process. Now, we pointed out that even at this level of stirring, there were some who were lenient because they said, if it's fully cooked, what are you really doing? Now, we rule stringently, but there are those who said, if it's fully cooked, are you really, what are you accelerating? It's cooked, right? And then there's another layer of stringency, which is that we don't also even ladle things out because ladling is a form of stirring. Okay? And then we also saw, by the way, if you recall, that when something is very liquidy, we also saw some more lenient opinions because And that's only by a solid that you should be stringent, but when something is already quite liquidy, then maybe there's more leniency. Okay, so with all that in mind, we have to recognize that there were different opinions throughout, and even when it came to ladling already was like a stringency on the level on another stringency. The Sephardim across the board are lenient to go ahead and ladle directly from something on the fire, because ladling is not mixing. It's one thing to say mixing, but you're going to go so far as to say ladling. The Ashkenazi minhag is to lichatchila not do so. Okay, so now, bottom line is, there's certainly what to rely upon in a situation like this, where many people, this is their hot food they're eating on Shabbos, whatever it is, there is what to rely upon, with that more lenient view, to go ahead and ladle directly from the fire when you are stuck. And I just share that just as an example of saying, had we just learned like the Shabbos Kitchen, or one of these books which just give the final bottom line, that would not be, at least in our head, to even know that that's a possibility. Okay, so someone went in the kitchen, came running over to me, said, oh no, we're stuck, we can't ladle from it, you know all the halachos. I said, no, there's a lenient opinion, and in this situation, there's certainly what to rely upon to use that lenient opinion. And so, again, maybe there should have been a warning that maybe you don't want to eat this for hygienic purposes, but hygienic reasons, but yes, go ahead.
But would you, in a case like that, just in general, not the specific case,
Yeah.
would you tell people that you know are machmir?
No, because there's certainly what to rely. If someone would ask me, I wouldn't hide it, but I'm not going to go like make an announcement. It'd be too confusing. If I'm in it again, you have to know. Meaning, if it was in my house and I had someone who I know might be more stringent than me, but I'm saying in a shul where they're relying on me anyways, for better or for worse. Then yeah. But yeah, maybe, yeah. It's a judgment call. But yeah, if you have a leniency, if I'm serving, non-Chalav Yisrael in my house and people who Chalav Yisrael, yeah, I mean, I'm going to mention them. So, you have to make a judgment call, I guess. Okay. You have to clean it out really well. Well, I'm not even worried about cleaning that. I just want to make sure the next time they use the inserts. Okay, it's a little whatever. Anyway, right? It doesn't matter how clean it is, as long as you use the insert next time, we're fine. But yeah, thank God I don't work in that kitchen. So, it's gonna burn unless they clean. Yeah. Okay, all right, we got a new insert. Okay. Anyway, and then a new crock pot. Okay, it happens. Okay. Okay. With that in mind, I'm sorry for grossing anyone out. Most of the food in this kitchen is very, very clean. We don't have any mice problems or anything of the nature. Okay. Okay. And I'm gonna. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about taking food out of the oven. Can you take food out of the oven or not? So it says Orcha Shabbos. Now the non-bold words says Orcha Shabbos. He says V'im hamachalim kvar nisbashlu me'erev Shabbos b'shir machal ben drusai. Okay, and if the food, of course, as we saw earlier, if the food is already halfway cooked, i.e. machal ben drusai, mutter lash osam batanor, you're allowed to leave them in the oven, right? That's what we saw earlier. If the food, let's say, takes 2 hours to bake chicken, and an hour has gone by, then there's no question. Of course, you're allowed. And you don't have to put any piece of tape or anything of that nature. V'anu dafka kasher ein hatanor michubar la tormastat. Okay, which means a thermostat. That's only when an oven doesn't have a thermostat. Okay, certain words. I remember I went to an Israeli yeshiva in Israel, and once in a while the mashgiach would be giving our lectures to the Americans in English, and once in a while I'd be yesh li milah chachim mesubach. It's like a very complicated word. I don't know. Anyone knows this says English like digital, like digital, like like if he's saying English words, like he thinks it's like a complicated word. It's like no, that's English. Anyway, but the point is fine. So thermostat is thermostat. Okay, ach v'taner mechuber lethermostat. An oven which has a thermostat, yesh lishol chacham ketzalinog. You have to ask a halachic authority how to act. Now, most of our ovens have a thermostat, right? So what do we do? Are we allowed? So very good. It's very nice that I can keep it in the oven, and I don't have to worry about shehiyah. But if it's going to be stuck in the oven, I can't open the oven. You're in trouble. Now, if you have a timer that's going to turn the oven off, you're good. But for an oven that doesn't have a timer, right? And you got your food in before Shabbos, very nice. Can you take it out? So let's see this Yalkut Yosef.
Or what about a Shabbos mode? Just take
Again,
it out.
Shabbos mode is the bad word in this class. We're going to come back to Shabbos mode. We're going to come back to Shabbos. I don't mean to be difficult, but I am sorry. We'll come back to it. God willing, we'll come back to it. And if I don't...
Take out food
Just for
from a
taking out the
Shabbos
food.
mode.
Well, hold on. Well, let's see what other folks can say, and then we'll come back to Shabbos mode. Okay, says the Yalkut Yosef, and this Yalkut, he's going to give us some of the background behind this whole discussion. So the Yalkut Yosef is Rav Avad Yosef. He was the preeminent Sephardic posek. He says like this: Tanur chashmali hapoel aidei thermostat, an electric oven which works with the thermostats. Yesh hanoagim lahakel gam bazeh. There are those who are lenient. Lahashos besocho me'erev Shabbos tavshel shenisbashel kol tzarko, to leave in the oven food which is fully cooked. Afilu mitzdamek v'yafalo, even if keeping in the oven may even enhance it a little bit, right? So, right, you're allowed to leave it. Let's say you have your chicken which is fully cooked, and now you're leaving it in the oven at 200. It might even be getting better in some way. That's fine. Uposchim, the key words are the next ones. Uposchim atanor b'Shabbos k'dei lahotzi hatavshel mitocho, and you're allowed to open the oven on Shabbos in order to take the food out of it. Umi'ikar hadin yesh lahakal bazeh, and according to the letter of the law, you could rely on this. Why? Okay, so he's going to give us a bit of a background. He says, okay, let's give the brackets. He says, "Mutter liskor es adelas hatanur b'Shabbos," and then you're allowed to close the door. He says also you're allowed to close the door of the oven on Shabbos. Ve'ein bazeh isur mishum matmin b'Shabbos. Okay, there's no issue of what we call hatmana. Hatmana, we haven't gotten into too much. Hatmana is like when you insulate something. Okay, so there is a whole discussion about not insulating on Shabbos. One of the 39 prohibitions is insulation. Okay, to go ahead and insulate something. We'll see what the parameters are later on. He says closing an oven door is not a form of insulation. You don't have to leave the oven door open a crack in order to ensure that it doesn't close. There are some poskim, he's coming to counter because there are some poskim who say that if you're leaving food before Shabbos begins, you have to ensure that the oven is open a crack. So what they suggest is leave the food like kind of on the edge of your of the grate so that the oven doesn't fully close, and then it's allowed. He says you don't have to do that. You can leave the oven fully closed. Okay? Fine. Let's skip the next paragraph. Let's go to the ha'ara or note 5. Okay? He says lefizeh lechora hu adin gam benidon didan. In our situation, even though when we open the oven, nichnas l'soch hatanur avir michalal hacheder. When we open the door of the oven, what happens? Air from outside goes in the oven. And what does that do? Right? Hagorem lefalas hatanur. It turns the oven on. Right? That's how a thermostat works. The thermostat is measuring the temperature. So as long as the oven door is closed and now it's at 350, great, it's going to stay at 350. If I open the oven, what happens? Air from the rest of my house, which is cooler, goes into the oven, right? The thermostat measures it. It says, oh, it got colder. And what does it do? It turns on the oven. That's the function of a thermostat. He says, Makal makom have a psik resha delo ich bislei. This is what we call a psik resha. Psik resha means an inevitable consequence, which I don't care about. In other words, there are scenarios where I care about where something inevitable happens, and I want it to happen. It's beneficial for me. And then there's psik resha, there's something which is an inevitable consequence, which I couldn't care less about. So if I open the oven door, okay, and it triggers the thermostat, right? I'm not trying to get the thermostat started, and the fact that now it starts warming up even more, I don't care about it, all right? Right? In truth, I would prefer if the oven would not even be receiving this cold air, because I want it to remain hot. I don't want the oven to have to deal with cold air. If you'd ask me if there was a theoretical way for me to remove the food from the oven without opening the oven, I would do it. I can't, right? But I don't want the cold air to go in and start making the oven go on, etc. Okay, since this is a case of indirect causation, because when I am opening the door of the oven, akati in or nidlak psicha. Of course, the fire, meaning the fire light, does not open directly from the opening of the door. In other words, there's two steps. I open the door. By opening the door immediately, when you open the oven door, it does not trigger the pilot lights or the electricity to go on. Right? What happens is you open the door, cold air goes in, and then it happens, right? So what we call this is grama. It's like a causing. It's not, the door is not a light switch. The door is not the same as opening, and by definition it's happening. I open, then air comes in, and then it goes on. It's that I open the door, then it causes air to go in, and then it triggers the thermostat. And there is a debate about this, in general, about causing things to happen. Okay, fine. And then, therefore, he says, because of that, you are therefore allowed. Okay, let's just turn the page where he comes to his conclusion. Okay, he says like this: even though we said in general one should not be lenient about this idea of grama, of causing things to happen on Shabbos. Maybe this is all true when I do something with my hands, which has an indirect cause. Okay, but he says over here where it's not as it's more indirect, therefore it's allowed. As far as electricity itself is also, one could argue, meaning electricity itself. What is electricity? right? How do we perceive electricity? Is that biblical? Am I doing something direct? Or even electricity, how does electricity work? It's also a form of causation. It's not like something which I'm doing directly. It's like I'm triggering something which triggers something which causes an electric current to move, which causes the fire to turn on. And therefore, he says, with all that in mind, I'd be allowed to open the oven. I'd be allowed to open the oven and to take out the food. Now, according to Ravadia, it sounds like he's saying, I'm allowed to open the oven and take out some food, close it again, and I'd be allowed to, do that. That would be allowed according to Ravadia. But you see over here what he's getting at. Again, it's a little bit of a complicated discussion, but his point is, it's not a direct act. When I'm opening that oven door and triggering the thermostat, it's not a direct act, and he's arguing that the increase of heat is something which I don't really want. Why don't I want it? Because the air that's coming in, I don't even want that air to be there, and therefore it's called psik reisha de lo ich bislei. Yes, it's inevitable, but it's inevitable, and I don't really care for it, therefore it's allowed. Okay? Now again, according to Ravadia, I believe he's saying I'm allowed to open it, take out some food. So let's say again, I have in my oven, I have chicken, which is fully baked, and I have a chicken soup, which is fully cooked, right? And I open my oven, and I want to serve the first course. Take out the chicken soup, put it on the table, close the oven again, right? Says Ravadia, no problem, right? Because why? Because nothing here nothing's happening direct, and therefore he says there's what to rely upon. Okay? Now there are those who let's. Now again, his whole basis is because he says it is the fact that the oven is turning on is something I don't care about at all. Okay? Now, in truth, one could make an argument that you do want it on, because when I close it, because when I open it, I still want it to be heating up. Certainly I want it to be heating up the things that are still in there, right? And therefore I do want it still on. So we'll come back to that argument in a moment. But let's first see the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso. Okay, so he's in source 40. Okay? In source 40, Ulam Tanur Chashmali. Okay, so this is Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso, there's Rav Neivert. He says when it comes to electric oven, Ayidei Veses Chom, a thermostat, Mutter Lishtamesh Bo, you're allowed to use it, Velases Bo Tavshil Lefnei Shabbos, and you're allowed to put food in there before Shabbos, Umutter Liftoach Es Delas HaTanur, you're allowed to open the door, Ach Virak Bizman Shiadua, Shaveses Kvar Hifel Es HaTanur. Only when you know that the thermostat has triggered the oven. Okay, so depends on the type of oven, you can listen and hear when the oven is actually running, right? He says when the oven is actually running, and it's on, meaning the flame, the electricity, you could hear the heat going. I don't know, there's a word for it. Okay, there, when you open the door, you're not triggering anything. You might elongate the amount of time that it's on, but you're not causing anything new to happen. Therefore, he says, only when you know it's actually the thermostat has already triggered the oven to be on, then you're allowed to open it, right? So according to this opinion, you'd have to listen closely. He's not agreeing that this is all too indirect. He says, no, I want the fire to be on. I want my food to be hot. And therefore, the only time I'd be allowed to open it is when I know that the oven is actually running. When it's up running, then when I open it, I'm not triggering the thermostat. Makes sense, yeah?
That used to be the same thing with the refrigerators.
It used to be the same thing with refrigerators, according to some, yeah. Yeah.
When I became from, I thought it was a thing that you had to listen to the refrigerator.
So there are some who say there are some who do that. There's some who do that.
No, but I thought that was I didn't know anything. I was 18. I thought you had to put your ear to a refrigerator.
There are.
But I didn't understand why.
Okay, but it's for a good reason. Meaning this is a similar reason. This brings to where we're going to get to. But this is every fridge essentially functions this way, which poses the question: why don't most of us put our ears to the fridge? Right? According to this, we're saying, right? So, is there a difference between an oven and a fridge? Maybe not. Okay, we're going to come back to that. We'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. Uvinian sgiras adelas when it comes to closing the door. Okay. Im yesh b'tanur ochel shadayin lo yisbashal kol tzarko. If there is food that isn't fully cooked, or if closing the door causes any electric effect, so you can't close it. Okay. Then they go ahead over here. I'm a little confused by this. But they quote one quote from the Star K from an oven article, Oven Kashrus for Shabbos Use, and they quote what they describe as a Star K policy. I believe, and I also found in writing, Rav Heinemann's policy is somewhere in between Rav Vadia and the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso. Okay, his view is as follows, and this is what many of us rely upon, and that is he says like this: Rav Vadia says it's when I open the oven, I don't want that cold air to be coming in. And therefore it's okay across the board. Rav Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso said no. Opening the oven, triggering that is a problem. Okay, Rabbi Heinemann takes the middle view. He says like this: if I'm opening the oven and taking all the food out right now, every single thing from the oven, then I don't care that the oven is going to be triggering something and bringing more heat in, because I don't care for my oven to have heat if there's nothing left inside of it. But if I plan on leaving something inside of it, even though Rav Avadia said, well, it doesn't matter since it's all indirect. Rav Avadia said that's okay. Rav Heinemann says no. If I'm leaving food inside, then I'm not allowed to do so. So the way that, again, many of us, function, and what we do over here in the Shul's ovens, and we do at home if I would leave something in the oven, is that if you do want to leave something in your oven, again, with all the caveats that we said before, ideally it's fully cooked, or at the very least it's halfway cooked, or in theory you could have it a little bit cooked, but the buttons are closed, and when you want to open it to take the food out, you cannot leave any, so even though you will trigger the thermostats, but the argument is I'll trigger the thermostats, but if I take all the food out, I don't care about the thermostat going on, and therefore since it's indirect, and I don't want the oven to be doing its thing, therefore I'm allowed to open the oven, take the food out, but as long as I take all the food out. Once I leave some of the food in, then I do want the thermostat to go on. It's true, in theory, I would like to take the food out with opening the oven, but at the end of the day, since I have to open it, I do want the thermostat to turn on, and therefore if I'm leaving some food in, it would be forbidden.
What if you leave it in with the door open?
Well then, the door, if I leave it in with the door open,
Like if you take out your challah, but you're leaving your chicken in, and the door's open, so you're not really, that
Right.
cold air is going in, but it's still warmer than the ambient temperature.
yeah, but then presumably, but once I open the door, it's going to trigger the thermostat to go on, and it's going to cause the food that's still in the oven to be heated up. I think it would still be problematic.
If it's on.
Not if it's on the word that will not be mentioned. Yes, but we're not talking about that today. So in a standard oven, it would. I think it would still be usher, meaning the fact that I don't close it. Yeah. Make sense? With me? No? Yes? No? Okay. Yeah. Quick review of the different halachas of an oven. Again, in theory, don't use your oven before Shabbos. Unless you have a mode. The certain ovens that we'll not talk about today, because that makes it a lot easier. But if you want to warm things up in your oven before Shabbos. So again, let's just talk about fully cooked food, because ideally our food is fully cooked before Shabbos, but you want to keep it warm, so you put your oven on 200 before Shabbos begins, just to keep it warm, right? That's a good temperature to keep it warm, right? So you have your challah and your chicken soup and your chicken, whatever you want to put it. You don't want to have a hot plate, you don't want to have a electric thing, so you put your oven on, and you put your oven on before Shabbos. You put all your food in there at 180 or 200, just keep it warm before Shabbos. No problem. According to Rav Heinemann, according to some poskim, the only way you can take food out is if you listen that the oven is running at that time. Then you could open, take all the food out. All right. But according to Rav Heinemann, you don't have to go ahead and do so. Why? Because you don't care about the fact that the fact that if you take all the food out at once, it's true it's going to trigger the oven to turn on, but it's so far removed from you and you don't care about it, that combined allows you to take all the food out. So again, and that's the normative, that's what I would tell people to do. That's what I would do, that if you want to put food in your oven before Shabbos, no problem. Again, let's just say fully cooked food, and you want to take it out during the meal, no problem. Just take it all out at once. At the shul, for the kiddush, when we have food in the warmers, like we have those warming, warmers. Yeah. What are they? Sorry? Warming cabinets, thank you. So when the food is taken out, if all the food is taken out at once, right, then, a Jew is allowed to do so. If they want to go and put things back in, whatever it is, then they have a non-Jew do it, but otherwise they open it, because when you close it, it's going to trigger it to go back on. So the way that the Kiddush volunteers, what they do is they could open it, and they take all the food out, and that's not a problem, even though it's going to ultimately trigger something to go on. They don't care about that being on, and it's too many steps removed. Good? Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's turn the page to electric hot plates and shehiyah. Okay, we're still talking about shehiyah, which is, again, there's two more major discussions that we have to get to about this whole topic. One is if I want to take something off of the fire, off of an element, and then put it back. So this sometimes comes up with like cholent. A person wants some cholent Friday night, or maybe you want some. Maybe you have some guests coming to your house. They're coming late. So there's some people you want to serve. So you want to take some chicken soup. You want to serve some chicken soup, and then you want to put it back on the fire. Okay, so we're going to talk about how you're allowed to do so. Whole discussion. I don't think we're going to get there today. And then the other discussion we're going to talk about as well is on Shabbos morning if I want to heat something up. Right. So then we've been talking about Friday, leading into Shabbos, putting things on the fire. But what about you have your kugel, you have your deli roll, whatever it is, and you want to put it on a hot plate or put it on a plata, you want to put it on something to warm up on Shabbos? What are the parameters of that? Those are two topics which we need to get to. But today, one more piece about shehiyah. Again, shehiyah is placing things on the fire before Shabbos begins. Now, we saw, just again to review, and we're going to eventually, we'll drill this all down, and that is that if your food is fully cooked or even halfway cooked, you're allowed to place it directly in an oven or on a cooktop, stovetop, right? If it's not fully cooked, what do you have to do? If it's not fully cooked, what do you have to do? If you want to put something on a fire before Shabbos begins, what do you have to do? Cover the thing, some form of a covering. So the question is, what is considered a good? So what's the idea behind a covering? The idea behind a covering is kind of twofold. It's a reminder. Now, how does it serve as a reminder? Because it's different. It doesn't belong there, right? You walk into the kitchen. If you were a non-Jew who had no knowledge of Shabbos and you walk into a kitchen, you're like, what is that doing there? What is that, right? What is this metal sheet? Why is there foil in my crock pot, right? In other words, it's something, it's there. That's not the gauge, but we're just using that as a way of, it doesn't belong here. That serves as a reminder because it doesn't belong here. Because it's not a cooking thing. It's not a cooking thing. Where it gets a little tricky is, how do we treat an electric hot plate? Is that not a cooking thing? Right? On the one hand, you could say, yeah, because you and I don't typically use an electric hot plate to cook things, right? But electric hot plate is a pretty normal thing. It's not only purchased by Jews, right? People have electric hot plates that they use. Yes, go ahead.
There are actually different kinds of electric hot
Yes,
plates. Like
yes.
I've noticed the Israeli ones, they get really hot. You can cook on that.
Yes.
But if you buy one that's out there for generally in the United States, they don't get as hot. You can adjust them, but they don't get as hot. I don't think you could actually, maybe you could cook an egg. You know what I mean? But you couldn't cook chicken on it.
Okay, so I hear. So again, temperature is going to be an interest, but you bring up an interesting point about the electric hot plates, because there's two interesting features about electric hot plates. One is the fact that, let's do a quick poll. Every people here have electric hot plates? Okay. Does it have a knob on your electric hot plate?
No.
Okay, so yes, okay, interesting. So the American, meaning like the standard one that you buy like in Costco or whatever on Amazon, will have a knob, because why wouldn't you want to have a knob? We want to have control of what I'm on level 2, 3. But if you're buying one from like whatever the kosher stores over here, the amazing or whatever, yeah, then you're gonna find ones without a knob. Okay, why? It kind of goes back to this whole discussion, right? You're pointing out correctly that from a perspective of heat, the one that I have, don't touch that on Shabbos. Like you will, or anytime, you'll burn your fingers, right? Because it gets really, really hot, right? At the same time, it doesn't have a knob, right? Okay, the converse is that some of those, I don't know the exact temperatures, but they may not get so hot, but they do have a knob, right? So when we start thinking about what looks non-cooking like, right? So is it about the fact that I could adjust it? Like, would someone cook something on something which doesn't have a knob in the modern era? Most people wouldn't. Maybe, again, you have like a fire pit, you make a hot dog. But for the most part, we want control. I want to control it. If I want to cook something, I want to have a knob, something could change it. So that's part of the discussion around electric hot plates. Is it about the heat? Is it about the knob? But because of that, we have this general discussion about electric hot plates. Is that enough of a difference when we talk about something odd that is going to be used to remind me not to cook on it? How odd does it have to be, right? So a piece of metal on top of your fire, that is weird. That is certainly a reminder. But what about electric hot plate? And that's what we're going to get into right now. And yes, the knob piece is also going to be part of the discussion. So let's look at source 42 on page 150. Page 150, turn a few pages. Says the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso, Vulam plata chashmalit hamyuchedes l'Shabbos. Let's say you have an electric hot plate designed for Shabbos, hamyuchedes l'shmor achom ha'ma'achal she'aleha, okay, which is designated to maintain the heat. Ve'en regilim levasho aleha, it is not normal to cook with it. And the temperature cannot be adjusted because either it has no knob or the knob has been maybe removed, let's say, or something. It does not need an additional cover on top of it. Why? Because in and of itself, it is a weird type of thing. And therefore you'd be allowed to leave food on it before Shabbos begins. So what he's talking about is, let's say you have, and I think someone mentioned they have this type of, many of us have a crock pot, right? But some people make their cholent on an element which is like an electric hot plate. I think you mentioned that. You have electric hot plates, right? So most people don't cook on electric hot plates. So Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso is saying, as long as it cannot be adjusted, as long as the temperature can't be adjusted, I could place my uncooked cholent on it, because that is like a covered oven, because it's so weird, because it's so different, okay? Shamati mi'agon of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach v'nimuko imo debezeh shema'amin be'erev Shabbos zekdir al plata kazos, by leaving a food on this type of hot plate, harizeh chashiv kiktuma, it's no different than a oven which is shoveled out. V'gam lo shayach hatam shel shameichat, and we're not concerned that maybe a person will adjust the temperature. Kivan she'ein ha'plata mi'u'edes lebishol, because the fact that it's not a normal, this plata, this electric plate, is not typically used for cooking, and you can't change the temperature, fine. And therefore, you're allowed to go ahead and do so, okay? Says the Yaakov Yosef, Ravad Yosef says a similar thing, in source 43, an electric hot plate, you don't have to make any extra separation between the hot plates and your food. You're allowed to place any food on this electric hot plate, whether it's partially cooked, whether it's fully cooked, it doesn't matter, you're allowed to go ahead and do so. So again, these opinions are saying an electric hot plate. Now they're clearly saying it's one that doesn't have a knob, or maybe the knob is fully covered, but you're allowed to place food on it because it is not something which you typically cook on. Yes?
But they're talking about putting the food on before Shabbos. They're not talking about like taking the kugel and putting
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're not getting, that's why I specifically mentioned, meaning we're not there yet. We're talking about a cholent, meaning that you're putting on before Shabbos. So we said I'm allowed to put it on. I'm certainly allowed to put a cholent on a crock pot, which is lined with foil because it's covered. What about an electric hot plate? So that he's saying you're allowed to place it on this electric hot plate. You don't have to line the electric hot plate. The electric hot plate is in and of itself seen as distinct enough, different enough, unique enough that there's no issue.
When I've been in Israel with people for Shabbos, they all seem to use that, and they use it on Friday, and they take their food and they put it on there before Shabbos, and that's how it keeps warm until the meal. And they don't use the oven then.
Correct. That's fine.
But it's
It's really hot. That's really hot. But I thought you were going to say something else, because in Israel, what you'll find is many people actually don't just use that. What they actually do is they put another layer on top of it. Right? Let's look. You'll see that. Look at source 44 on page 151. Okay, so Orcha Shabbos, Plata Chashmalit, Hamiuchedes LaShabbos, an electric hot plate designed for Shabbos. Asher Ein Ba Dargos Shono Shalcham. Even though it doesn't have, if it doesn't have a knob, it doesn't have the ability to change the temperature. Dina Kegrufa Ktuma Mutter Lahashos Lagabat Avshilam Erev Shabbos. You're allowed to again place things directly on it. V'yesh Machmirim Umatrichim Lechasosa B'niyar Alumaniyom Ava. There are those who necessitate placing thick foil on top of it. For the same reason that I said you should put foil on in your crock pot, because a crock pot is certainly a normal way of cooking things. There are those who say an electric hot plate is the same thing. People, you could cook on electric hot plates, and therefore there are those who say you should put foil on top of the electric hot plates.
Doesn't that make it hotter?
It might make it hotter, but again, and this goes back to what you're both getting at, it's not so much about how hot is it. It's about reminding you, it's about making a distinction between regular cooking and Shabbos, Erev Shabbos cooking. So it's not so much about the heat, it's more about, the way they're understanding, it's more about the recognition, okay? He says, Agrishol Yashiv, of Shomavo Yashiv, V'taimo Dekivan She'en Heker, Kan Heker V'chatzitza, Lo Plug Rabbanan. Okay, so he says, even though it's not so common, but since at the end of the day, it is a normal cooking element. Therefore, you should go ahead and do so. He alludes over here. He doesn't spell it out, but the Chazon Ish is even more stringent. The Chazon Ish says, and there are others who say that a hot plate gets, and this to your point, gets really hot, and therefore, no, it is a normal thing. Granted, we don't normally cook that way, but if push comes to shove, let's say you had one of those electric hot plates, your oven broke, okay, and you wanted to go ahead and make some food, and it gets really hot. What would you do? You'd plug it in and use it. It could cook. It could cook. And therefore, there are those who say with an electric hot plate, certainly one that gets very hot, you would have to go ahead and take like a tin foil, flip it over, right? Or put a pot, and then put the food on top of that. Otherwise, putting it directly on the hot plate, even before Shabbos begins, is if you're talking about food, again, we're talking about food which is not fully cooked, right? If you're talking about food which is not fully cooked, to go ahead and do so is basically putting food in an oven which isn't covered, which you can't do. Yes?
But I'm thinking, even with a regular plato, the regular blech. So my stove came with a griddle.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's raised, but that's meant to cook on. So,
sure.
But if you use that as a blech, it's still going to get hot enough to cook on. That's the whole point.
So the key is not so much what the heat is not so much, the key is what's normal, what's abnormal. To use the griddle as a blech is not allowed, because a griddle is part of your oven, right? But if I put a piece of metal on top of it, since it's not part of my oven, then that's going to be allowed.
Okay.
Right?
So even if you could cook eggs or pancakes or
no problem. Correct. So again, let's just review. I think this might be a little confusing. Again, most of it, this is not going to come up on a too regular of a basis, because.
But the ashes, wasn't the whole point of putting the ashes in the fire so that you can't make the temperature hotter?
Correct, stoking the coals, right? So you need a reminder less so about right there that we. It's not so much that it's diminishing. It's not so much that it's diminishing the temperature, but it's the way that most supposed to understand it. The fact that it diminishes it is enough of a reminder. Meaning, this putting the coals. It's not like I'm putting banana peels. I'm putting something which diminishes the coals. That was a weird example. I'm putting the ash which diminish the coals, and that serves as a reminder. So anything I'm doing which serves as a reminder is sufficient.
Even if it doesn't diminish.
Even if it doesn't diminish heat, even if it increases the heat, correct. But as long as it acts as a normal reminder, it's a little confusing. Okay, so let's just quickly review because I think this whole thing is a little confusing. Okay, for most scenarios, I think most of us are going to Shabbos with fully cooked food, for the most part. Maybe the exception being cholent, which we'll come back to in a second, right? So let's just do a quickly review of like Erev Shabbos. Most of your food is fully cooked, right? If your food is fully cooked, you could put it on a hot plate, you could put it on you could put it in an oven. You could put it in an oven before Shabbos if it's fully cooked, right? And then we spoke about taking it out. Fine, you take it out all at once. But if your food is fully cooked, then you could put it in a regular oven. You could put it on a regular stove. Your chicken soup is fully cooked, and you wanna make it sure it's piping hot. You know, those people want it really, really hot chicken soup, and there's no other way of doing it. So what do? You keep it on the fire. If it's fully cooked, keep it on the fire. Going into Shabbos, and then Shabbos begins. Take it off your elements, no problem, because it's fully cooked. All good. Okay. Then we had a discussion. What if your food is not fully cooked going into Shabbos? Then I need to have something that serves as a reminder of some sort that I shouldn't change the temperature, right? So this comes up most often with a cholent. Because the cholent, very often I'm going into Shabbos and my cholent is not fully cooked. So there what I do, I cover the elements with foil, and then it's fine. I could put a non-cooked cholent in. Okay, that's the easy case, straightforward, and that's why I recommend just putting a piece of foil there, covering your thing, and you're good to go. Where it's going to be a little bit more complicated is, let's say you're running before Shabbos. There's going to be these unique scenarios. You're running before Shabbos and you didn't have your food's not fully cooked. So there we spoke about with an oven, you could go ahead and tape the knobs. That might be one way of doing it. But you could put it on a stove top with a blech. So let's say you're running it. Shabbos isn't Shabbos in a few minutes, and you didn't make your chicken soup yet. So you can put your chicken soup on, but you put it on a blech, no problem. Right? And then we talk about electric hot plates. There we have many opinions saying that's okay. Electric hot plate is like a blech. It's so different. There are stringent opinions who say no, electric hot plate is not like an oven, and therefore electric hot plate is not like a blech, and therefore you have to add either a piece of foil or flip over a pan. You will not be able to put it directly onto an electric hot plate. That said, the more we go with the more lenient opinion. So again, if you're running before Shabbos, if your food is fully cooked, you can put an electric hot plate, no questions asked. If your food is not fully cooked, according to many opinions, you can put it directly on the electric hot plates. Is that an okay summary, or is it still very confusing? Yeah? Sort of got it? Yes, Sarah.
Is there some sort of criteria for the barrier between the heating element and the pot?
Yeah, so here we have a debate. Some say just a piece of foil, even though it's very thin, and some say it has to be elevated, right? And that discussion is going to play a role. So the reason I mentioned this debate is because it's going to play a role for our either next week or the week after, when we talk about placing the food from the fridge on Shabbos morning, right? So we've all been talking about Friday, right? Going into Shabbos with uncooked food or cooked food. But now on Shabbos morning, which, that's a whole different discussion. I want to warm up my food. Where am I allowed to put it? We ran out of time, so we'll pick up on this discussion, right? We'll all do this. We heat up food on Shabbos morning for a lunch meal. How do you do it appropriately? And that's going to be a discussion unto its own. We'll come back to that next week. We're going to talk about Chazar.
Shabbos ovens.
And along with Shabbos ovens, eventually we will have to get back to. Okay, have a great day. Have a great week.